Welcome to 100 Incredible Facts About Australia by the Atlas 100. What if I told you there's a country where a single plant has been alive for 100,000 years? Where oral stories are proven to be 18,000 years accurate? Where the army once declared war on birds and lost? And where the oldest human culture on Earth is still actively practiced today? That country is Australia. And in the next hour, I'm going to give you 100 facts that will completely change how you see it. Not the beaches and barbecues version, the real one. Let's go. Australia is the only country on Earth that is also an entire continent. Every other continent is shared. Australia owns all of it. Every square kilometer from coast to coast. One nation. Visually, show continent comparison map. Australia versus Europe, Asia, etc. It covers approximately 7.7 million square kilometers, making it the sixth largest country by area. To drive coast to coast takes longer than crossing the Atlantic by ship. The name Australia comes from the Latin word australis, meaning southern. Mapmakers called it Terra Australis, the southern land, for centuries before anyone actually found it. They theorized it had to exist just to balance out all the land in the northern hemisphere. Australia is the driest inhabited continent on Earth. Much of the interior receives less than 250 millimeters of rain per year. Some rivers on official maps haven't flowed in over a decade. 81% of Australia is Outback. The cities, beaches, and farms that most people picture, that's just the rim. The vast interior, red earth, dust, silence, is the real Australia. Visually, satellite image showing population density hugging the coast. Despite this, Australia's mainland has 0 active volcanoes. The continent sits in the middle of a tectonic plate far from any active boundaries. Geologically, it is one of the most stable land masses on Earth. Australia was once part of a supercontinent called Sahul, which connected it to New Guinea via dry land. When sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age, the connection was permanently severed, creating the island continent we know today. The oldest fossils ever found, 3.4 billion years old, were discovered in the Pilbara region of Western Australia. That is microbial life from a time when the Earth was barely a quarter of its current age. The interior is mostly desert, but the coasts are highly livable. Australia has 6 distinct climate zones, ranging from tropical in the north to cool temperate in the south. The coasts are where almost everyone lives. 85 to 90% of Australians live within 50 kilometers of the coast. For a country this vast, that is extraordinary. The interior, roughly 6 million square kilometers of it, is home to almost no one. Australia doesn't just have natural wonders, it has records, world records. Let's go through them. Australia has over 10,000 beaches. If you visited one new beach every day, it would take over 27 years to see them all. No other country on Earth comes close. The Great Barrier Reef is the largest living structure on Earth. It stretches 2,300 kilometers along the Queensland coast and is made up of nearly 3,000 individual reef systems. It is so big it has its own postal code. The Great Barrier Reef is visible from space. Astronauts can identify it with the naked eye from the International Space Station, a living organism visible from orbit. The Daintree rainforest is approximately 180 million years old. The dinosaurs hadn't even reached their peak when this forest already existed. It is the oldest continuously surviving rainforest on the planet. K'gari, formerly Fraser Island, is the largest sand island in the world, over 120 kilometers long, and it grows actual rainforest. Trees taller than houses growing directly out of sand dunes. Australia has naturally occurring pink lakes. Lakes like Lake Hillier in Western Australia are a vivid bubblegum pink, caused by salt-loving algae and bacteria. The color is completely natural and permanent. Cape Grim in Tasmania measures the cleanest air on Earth. Scientists use it as the global baseline, the reference point for what unpolluted atmosphere actually looks like. The wind there has crossed thousands of kilometers of open ocean without touching land. Australia's national parks are collectively larger than Germany. The total protected area exceeds 690,000 square kilometers, an area bigger than an entire European nation set aside purely for conservation. The Australian Alps receive more snowfall annually than Switzerland. Most people don't picture Australia as ski country, but New South Wales and Victoria get more total snow each year than the Swiss Alps. The season is shorter, but the volume is larger. The oldest known living organism on Earth is Australian. Posidonia australis, a seagrass meadow in Shark Bay, Western Australia, is a single clonal organism estimated to be 100,000 years old, covering 180 square kilometers of seafloor. One plant, 100,000 years old. Let that sink in for a second. 100,000 years. While humans were still living in caves across the world, this plant was already ancient. Now for the part everyone talks about. Yes, Australia is full of animals that can kill you. But the full picture is way more interesting than that. Australia has over 750 species of reptile, more than any other country on Earth. Thorny devils that drink through their skin, goannas nearly 2 meters long, saltwater crocodiles that haven't changed in 200 million years. Do you know of the world's 25 most venomous snakes live in Australia? The inland taipan, Australia's most famous, has the most toxic venom of any snake on Earth. Drop for drop, nothing else comes close. Despite this, snake deaths in Australia are extremely rare. On average, fewer than 4 people die per year from snakebite across the entire continent. More Australians die from bee stings. The danger is real but wildly overstated. There are more kangaroos in Australia than people. The human population is around 27 million. The kangaroo population is estimated at 40 to 50 million. They outnumber us nearly 2 to 1. Australia has 3.3 times more sheep than people. At peak, there were over 170 million sheep. Even today, sheep outnumber humans by more than 3 to 1, a legacy of the wool industry that built the modern nation. The platypus and the echidna are the only egg-laying mammals on Earth, and both live in Australia. When the first platypus specimen arrived in Britain in 1799, scientists thought it was a hoax. Someone had sewn a duck's bill onto a beaver. They were wrong. The platypus hunts using electroreception. It can detect the electrical fields produced by the muscle contractions of its prey, navigating and hunting in complete darkness underwater without using its eyes or ears at all. It also has a venomous spur on its hind leg. Australia was once home to megafauna of enormous scale, giant wombats the size of rhinos, kangaroos standing 3 meters tall, a marsupial lion, pound for pound, one of the most powerful predators ever to walk the earth. A goanna potentially 7 meters long. Humans lived alongside Australian megafauna for at least 20,000 years. The first Australians arrived when these giants were still alive. They hunted them, lived with them, and quite possibly depicted them in rock art. They were not mythological, they were neighbors. The thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger, was hunted to extinction in 1936. The last known individual died in a Hobart Zoo on September 7, 1936. It is now the subject of serious de-extinction research using preserved DNA. Australia may get its apex predator back. This is where the story gets genuinely extraordinary. The human history of Australia is the deepest, richest, and most underappreciated story on Earth. Humans first arrived in Australia between 45,000 and 65,000 years ago. That is 10 times older than the pyramids of Egypt. When the ancestors of the first Australians were already established on this continent, the last ice age was still in full swing. Aboriginal Australians maintain the oldest continuous culture on Earth. Not one of the oldest, the oldest. 60,000 plus years of unbroken cultural transmission, language, ceremony, law, and relationship to country, passed down through an unbroken chain of generations. The first Australians arrived by sea deliberately. Even at the lowest ice age sea levels, Australia was separated from the nearest landmass by open ocean. These were not accidental arrivals washed ashore. They built watercraft and navigated intentionally to a new continent. 65,000 years ago. This is one of the earliest confirmed open ocean voyages in human history. It predates everything else we know about seafaring by tens of thousands of years. They spread across the entire continent within a few thousand years, including into the most remote deserts, the tropical north, the alpine south, and every landscape in between. They didn't avoid the hard country, they learned it. Before European arrival, Australia had over 250 distinct language groups. 250 languages, many as different from each other as English is from Japanese. Not dialects, fully distinct languages, each shaped by the specific landscape that produced it. There were over 500 distinct nations and clans across Australia. Each had its own territory, governance, law, ceremony, songs, and diplomatic relationships with neighbors. Pre-colonial Australia was not an empty wilderness. It was a complex, organized, fully inhabited civilization. The concept of country in Aboriginal Australian culture means something far deeper than geography. Country is a living relationship. Something you belong to, are responsible for, and that knows you. Ancestors are in it. Law comes from it. Your identity is inseparable from it. Trade networks existed across the entire continent. Goods, ochre, shells, tools, seeds moved along established routes spanning thousands of kilometers. Ideas, songs, and ceremonies also moved along these networks. This was a connected civilization, not isolated pockets of people. Large gatherings of hundreds to thousands of people occurred at regular appointed times and places for ceremony, trade, dispute resolution, and celebration. These were not random meetings. They were organized events on a continental scale. The doctrine of terra nullius, used to justify British colonization, declared Australia legally empty. This was false. The land was owned, governed, and managed by sovereign peoples under systems of law that had operated for tens of thousands of years. Here's what most history books miss entirely. The first Australians weren't just surviving, they were innovating at a level that rewrites the timeline of human achievement. The oldest ground-edge axe ever found anywhere on Earth was discovered in the Kimberley region of Western Australia, 46,000 years old. Everywhere else in the world, this technology wouldn't appear for tens of thousands of years. 65,000-year-old stone tools found at Majet Bebe in the Northern Territory include grinding stones and ochre, evidence of not just tool use, but symbolic thinking and food processing. These are among the oldest artifacts of complex human behavior ever found. People in Australia were processing grain 30,000 years ago, grinding seeds into flour and cooking them. This predates the so-called agricultural revolution in the Fertile Crescent by more than 20,000 years. The conventional history of food needs rewriting. Aquaculture systems in southwestern Victoria are 8,000 years old. Channels, weirs, and holding ponds built from basalt designed to trap and manage eels. Managed aquaculture, 8,000 years ago. This is not primitive hunter-gathering. This is engineering. The Budge Bim Eel Farm Complex in Victoria, 6,600 years old, supported semi-permanent settlements, communities that stayed in one place because they had built infrastructure worth staying for. The Gunditjmara people were farming eels while Europe was still in the Stone Age. Do you know that Budge Bim was awarded UNESCO World Heritage status in 2019? The Brewerina fish traps on the Barwon River in New South Wales are among the oldest human-made structures on Earth, potentially tens of thousands of years old. A system of stone walls across the river creating interconnected fish traps, still partially visible today. The boomerang is a sophisticated aerodynamic tool, not just the returning kind. Hunting boomerangs were non-returning weapons designed to travel straight and fast, used to strike birds in flight or skim across water to flush flocks into nets. The aerodynamics were understood empirically millennia before Western science caught up. The woomera is a spear-throwing device that functions as a mechanical lever, dramatically increasing the speed and force of a thrown spear. It is one of the oldest and most refined examples of this technology in the archaeological record anywhere in the world. Desert survival knowledge was encyclopedic and precise. First Australians could cross hundreds of kilometers of waterless desert because they possessed transgenerational knowledge of every hidden rock hole, tree root water source, and bird behavior that indicated a nearby water hole. This knowledge was not guesswork. It was science. Songlines encoded navigational routes across the entire continent. Traditional songs describe the landscape in precise sequence: waterholes, landmarks, safe passages, allowing someone who had learned the song to navigate country they had never physically visited. A GPS system built entirely in human memory, running for 60,000 years. Firestick farming shaped the Australian landscape for tens of thousands of years. Aboriginal Australians used controlled, precise, seasonal burns to manage vegetation, attract game, promote food plants, and prevent catastrophic wildfires. The natural landscape Europeans found was, in reality, a carefully cultivated one. The parkland-style grasslands that early settlers described as like an English country estate were the product of millennia of deliberate burning, not a natural accident. Seasonal movement across country was a precision system, not wandering. Communities moved through their territory following exact seasonal patterns, tracking what was flowering, fruiting, breeding, or migrating in each area at each time of year. This maximized food availability and allowed the land to recover between visits. Aboriginal Australians developed sophisticated astronomical calendars. The rising and setting of specific star clusters signaled the beginning of specific seasons, the availability of specific foods, and the timing of ceremonies, with a precision verified by tens of thousands of years of observation. They also developed dark constellation astronomy, reading shapes in the dark patches of the Milky Way rather than just connecting stars. The emu in the sky, for example, is a dark constellation whose orientation in the night sky precisely indicates when emus are nesting and their eggs are available on the ground. Totemism distributed ecological responsibility across the entire society. Each clan held responsibility for a specific species or natural feature, performing ceremonies to ensure its abundance, maintaining knowledge of its habits, and speaking for it in governance. Every living thing had a custodian. Land ownership existed in complex, legally binding form. Country was inherited, governed, and defended through established law. Boundaries were known, respected, and enforced. The idea that Australia was unowned before 1788 was not a description of reality. It was a legal fiction imposed to justify taking it. Intellectual property law existed in Aboriginal Australian societies. Stories, songs, and ceremonial designs were owned by specific families and clans. Using another group's story without permission was a serious legal offense with real consequences. Knowledge had custodians, authors, and inheritance laws. Thousands of years before copyright was invented. The dreaming is not a creation myth in the conventional sense. It describes an ongoing reality, the foundational layer of existence in which ancestral beings shaped the landscape through their actions. The dreaming is not past tense, it is present. The land that exists today is the dreaming made physical. The rainbow serpent is one of the oldest continuously depicted spiritual figures in human art, appearing in rock paintings at least 6,000 years old and possibly much older. It appears across dozens of culturally distinct groups, always associated with water, rain, and the carving of the landscape. Aboriginal oral histories accurately describe coastlines from 7,000 to 18,000 years ago. Stories passed down through generations describe specific areas of land that were once dry and inhabited, and have since been swallowed by rising seas. Geologists mapped those ancient coastlines and confirmed the stories were geographically accurate. The oral record is older than any written history on Earth. This is not metaphor. These are verified geological events encoded in human memory for up to 18,000 years. It is the longest-running accurate historical record in human existence. Some Australian rock art is estimated to be over 40,000 years old. Among the oldest known figurative art on Earth, the Murujuga, Burrup Peninsula, rock art complex in Western Australia may contain over 1 million individual engravings. Rock art in Australia depicts animals that are now extinct. Thylacines, megafauna, and other lost species appear in paintings made by people who actually saw these creatures alive. The rock art is a zoological record of lost worlds. Mungo Lady, found at Lake Mungo in New South Wales, is the oldest known example of human cremation on Earth, at approximately 40,000 years old. The intentional burning and burial of her remains indicates complex belief systems and ritual practice at a time when most of the world was not yet fully settled by modern humans. Mungo Man, found nearby, is one of the oldest examples of ritual burial with ochre anywhere in the world, also around 40,000 years old. His arms were folded across his chest, and his body was dusted with red pigment. 40,000 years ago, someone grieved for him enough to give him a ceremony. Ceremonial dances functioned as an educational system. They encoded ecological knowledge, social law, survival skills, and spiritual understanding, transmitted through music, movement, and full sensory experience. Information retained through ceremony is retained more deeply than information learned from text. The didgeridoo, or yidaki, is one of the oldest wind instruments on Earth. Played using circular breathing, it produces a continuous sound without pause. Its origins in Australia likely extend well beyond the 1,500-year archaeological record. In the open country at night, its resonance seems to come from the land itself. Law was encoded in story in Aboriginal Australian societies. The dreaming narratives describing ancestral behavior were simultaneously legal codes. The story of an ancestor who broke a boundary and suffered consequences was also the law about boundaries. You couldn't separate the narrative from the legislation. Women held parallel and equally complex knowledge systems to men. Women's ceremonies, women's sacred sites, women's botanical and medicinal knowledge. These were entirely separate domains, no less sacred, no less sophisticated. Aboriginal Australian society was not male-dominated in its knowledge structures. It was dual. Men's initiation ceremonies transmitted restricted knowledge, ecological, cosmological, legal, and ceremonial, that was accessible only to initiated members. Sacred objects held by initiated men carried obligations across generations. The knowledge was not a privilege. It was a responsibility. Some sacred sites are restricted to specific groups based on gender, initiation level, and kinship, not arbitrarily, but because specific knowledge is considered genuinely dangerous in the wrong context. This is a sophisticated understanding of how power and knowledge interact. Traditional plant medicine was extensive, specific, and scientifically accurate. Bark infusions for fever, leaf poultices for infection, smoke treatments for respiratory conditions. Modern laboratory analysis has repeatedly confirmed the medicinal properties that traditional knowledge holders attributed to specific plants. The knowledge was correct. Avoidance relationships structured social interaction to reduce conflict. Complex protocols governing who could speak to whom, who could be in whose presence, and how, refined over thousands of years of living in close community with the same people for entire lifetimes. A technology of social harmony built into the architecture of daily life. Knowledge systems were deliberately structured for long-term retention. Ceremony, song, dance, story, and physical movement all encode information in multiple simultaneous channels, making it more resistant to distortion over time than any written record. This is why oral traditions that are 18,000 years old can still be geographically verified. 55,000-year-old shelters have been identified in the Northern Territory. At sites like Majed Bebe, the accumulated sediment shows people returning to the same rock shelter season after season for tens of thousands of years. The oldest evidence of people coming home. Ancient hearths across Australia date back tens of thousands of years. Each one is a record of a specific evening, warmth, food, story, community, in the middle of an enormous and ancient continent. Chains of fire burning across deep time. Mungo Lady represents the world's oldest known cremation 40,000 years ago. Her bones were burned, crushed, and buried with clear intentionality. This is the earliest evidence of a ritual response to death anywhere on Earth. A 9,500-year-old boomerang found in South Australia is still immediately recognizable as a boomerang. The design has not changed in 9,500 years because it was right from the beginning. One of the longest-running successful technology designs in human history. Stone tools found beneath volcanic ash in Victoria can be dated with rare precision because the volcanic eruption above them can be dated exactly. These tools are consistently older than previous estimates for human occupation in those regions, continuously pushing back the arrival timeline. Recent discoveries suggest possible early pottery in northern Australia that could rank among the oldest ceramics ever found. The research is ongoing, but Australia keeps producing evidence that revises the conventional timeline of human technological development. A site near Warrnambool in Victoria shows possible evidence of human presence 120,000 years ago, far earlier than any accepted date for modern human expansion out of Africa. The evidence is contested and unresolved, but it is being taken seriously by researchers. If confirmed, it would rewrite human prehistory entirely. Australia has surprised the scientific world before. The debate continues. Indonesian traders from Makassar were visiting northern Australia for at least 200 to 400 years before British colonization. They came for trepang, sea cucumbers, sailing seasonally on monsoon winds. This was a regular, organized, multi-generational trading relationship. The exchange with Makassan traders was genuinely two-directional. Aboriginal peoples of Arnhem Land adopted Makassan loan words, canoe designs, and material goods. Makassan traders adopted local knowledge and relationships. Words, technology, and culture crossed the Timor Sea in both directions. Bennelong was among the first Aboriginal Australians to visit England, sailing with Governor Phillip in 1792. He was presented at court, moved through London society, and returned to Australia in 1795 to find his world irrevocably changed. His life, navigating two worlds at enormous personal cost, captures the full human weight of what colonial contact meant. The following facts are important and needs to be said clearly. British colonization began in 1788 on the legal fiction of terra nullius. The land was declared belonging to no one. This directly contradicted the reality of over 500 sovereign nations with established law, governance, and territorial boundaries. The frontier wars lasted from 1788 until at least the 1930s. Not a brief conflict, not a single event. More than a century of armed confrontations as the colonial frontier pushed outward across the continent, meeting resistance that was met with force. The University of Newcastle's Colonial Frontier Massacres Project has documented over 400 massacre sites across Australia, places where historical evidence shows organized killings of Aboriginal people. Researchers believe the real number is significantly higher. The last confirmed massacre was at Coniston, Northern Territory in 1928. 1928, within living memory of people alive in the mid-20th century. This is not ancient history. Aboriginal resistance was sustained, organized, and real. Figures like Pemulwuy, Windradine, Jandamara, and many others led armed resistance campaigns that lasted years or decades. They were not passive victims. They were people defending their country, and the fact that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are still here, still on country, still practicing culture, still speaking languages, is one of the most remarkable stories of survival and resilience in all of human history. Australia's population is approximately 27 million people, spread across 7.7 million square kilometers. That makes it one of the least densely populated nations on Earth. Vast areas of the interior have a population density close to zero. 1 in 3 Australians was born overseas. 33% of the population are first-generation immigrants. Australia has one of the highest proportions of overseas-born residents of any country in the world, higher than the US, UK, or Canada. Over 300 languages are spoken in Australia today. Modern Australia is linguistically as diverse as ancient Australia was. The specific languages have changed entirely. The extraordinary diversity has not. Many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today live in cities. The common image of Indigenous Australians as exclusively rural or remote is inaccurate. Indigenous Australians are lawyers, artists, politicians, academics, and athletes in every major city. Their culture did not stop at the city limits. Country does not disappear when a city is built on it. The Indigenous Australian population is young and growing. There are more young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians alive today than at any point since colonization. The oldest living culture on Earth is not declining, it is expanding. And finally, A few facts about modern Australia that are just genuinely surprising or delightful. Australia's capital is Canberra, not Sydney or Melbourne. When the colonies federated in 1901, Sydney and Melbourne both wanted to be the capital and neither would give in. The compromise: build an entirely new city between them, in the middle of nowhere. Canberra didn't even open its parliament until 1927. Australia has 6 states and 2 territories, each with its own government, laws, and distinct character. A single country, but with enough internal variation that Australians from different states sometimes feel like they're from different nations. Melbourne has the largest urban tram network in the world. Over 250 kilometers of track, running continuously since the 1880s. Not Sydney, not Tokyo, Melbourne, the largest tram network on Earth. Australia has over 60 wine regions spread across multiple states and climate zones, producing everything from tropical fruit-forward whites in Queensland to world-class cool climate Pinot Noir in Tasmania. The Hunter Valley's Semillon and the Barossa Old Vine Shiraz are among the most distinctive styles produced anywhere on Earth. Highway 1, the road that circles the entire continent, is approximately 14,500 kilometers long, the longest national highway on Earth. Driving the full loop takes roughly 3 months. Visually, map of Highway 1 looping around Australia puts the scale in immediate perspective. The Nullarbor Plain has the longest straight road in Australia, 146 kilometers without a single bend or curve. The air highway across the Nullarbor is one of the most disorientating driving experiences on Earth, flat, treeless, and seemingly infinite in every direction. The Dingo Fence is 5,600 kilometers long, the longest fence in the world, built to keep dingoes out of the sheep farming regions of southeastern Australia. It is almost twice the length of the Great Wall of China. In 1932, the Australian military declared war on emus and lost. 20,000 emus had invaded Western Australian farmland. The army deployed 2 soldiers with 2 Lewis guns and 10,000 rounds. The emus refused to cooperate. They scattered when fired on, absorbed bullets with apparent indifference, and the military withdrew after 10 days. The official verdict: the emus won. The incident is now known as the Great Emu War. Major Meredith, the officer in charge, reportedly said the emus could face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks. Australia tried to fight birds with machine guns. The birds won. This is also Australia. 100 facts, and we've barely scratched the surface. Australia is the oldest continent, home to the oldest culture, the oldest living organism, the oldest evidence of cremation, the oldest axes, the oldest accurate historical records. It has more venomous snakes than anywhere on Earth, and almost nobody dies from them. It has a seagrass plant older than human civilization. It fought birds with machine guns and lost. But the most important thing I hope you take from this video is the one that gets talked about least: 60,000 years of continuous, sophisticated, innovative human culture. Still alive, still growing, still here. That is not a footnote. That is the headline. If you learned something today, subscribe. We cover the parts of history and science that don't make the textbooks. And if there's a country, culture, or topic you want us to go deep on next, leave it in the comments. See you in the next one. If you like to see more videos like this, don't forget to hit a like and subscribe.